Hi everyone, I'm Todd. I work at SAS Institute, and I've been there about 30 years, and we recently replaced 2 search engines with Fusion. One of the problems we had, or one of the things we had to do, was do a rigorous development cycle. So we want to know how to use Fusion in a rigorous way, just like any other deployment cycle that we do with any other software. The agenda today is going to be, we're going to talk about how to make changes to your Fusion instance. That's updating data sources, index pipelines, things like that. We also are going to go over how we do source control, and how we go through dev, test, and prod. And also, if there's time at the end, one of the tools that we're developing is a Java-based command line tool that helps copy all these things to where we need to go. So about a year ago, about 3 years ago, we started working on replacing a Google search appliance and an old product called UltraSeek. We had search engines that we used inside the company, which was the Google search appliance. And for customers, when they came into SAS.com, they used UltraSeek. GSA, they end-of-life pretty much internal search, so no more big yellow boxes. And UltraSeek, they got bought out so many times, they just said, we're not doing search anymore, so don't even ask us. So we found Fusion, and using the Lucidworks Fusion on top of Solar. Everyone says on top of Solar, don't they? We started using that, but then the first thing you have to do is you're going to make changes. How do we get those into production without screwing everything up? That's what this talk is about. Also, during this cycle, we started with version 2, and we've upgraded to version 3. We're about to upgrade to version 4. Or we have, our external site is 4 now, and we'll be doing the internal site in the next month or 2. So most of the stuff I've worked on has been for version 3, because we've had that stable the longest. So there's different ways to make changes. The first way, and probably what everyone starts with, is with the Fusion web app. You go to port 8764 and log in with your ID. The web application is very easy to use. It's interactive. You have the pipeline workbenches, which work pretty well in 3. They didn't work too well in 2. It makes it very easy to interactively make changes. And I'm sure everyone's done that already. That's probably the first way you do it. The problem with that, with any interactive development, is you don't have source control. It's not built in, and it's specific to that server. So unless you're making your changes live in production, typing in the changes, the web app isn't going to help you. And you shouldn't be doing that anyway in production, unless it's an emergency. Even then, I don't know. But they have a well-documented REST API. It covers everything. The web app itself uses the API, and we use the developer tools in the web browser to actually see exactly what API calls they were making, what's supposed to come back, and that informed how we structured our source control and how we made updates as well. The first thing is you can use Postman. It's a third. Has anyone used Postman? Okay, or SOAP UI. I like them both. They both let you interact with the REST API, and so you can see all your changes and like that. One of the things when we do make changes, we do use something like Postman to pull those changes down into a JSON file, and we put that into our source control. With the REST API, you can use any. Everyone's used REST, right? So then, you can use any language you want, and REST is just a very universal way of talking to a server. Before we get in there, there's 2 main ideas that these are the 2 ideas. You can implement them any way you want, but you need to have source control for your changes, and when we do deployments, it's best if you can do it through a command line tool. You should be able to deploy anything through a script. That's common practice if you have auditors that check your deployments or your security, anything like that. Every change has to be done through a script. Again, it's essential to have source control. No source control, no control at all. So that's huge. When you have things in source control, all your changes, you make tests, you do your tests, and then you label that as a release. That way you deploy that release, and if there's a problem, you can deploy the release, redeploy the previous release. You can roll it back. Like I said, we use the REST API to look at the structure coming back. I think we also had professional services come in. That was before I got on the team, but they said this is the best structure to have. And you can see that when you look through the API, or through there's the object API, I think is new with 3. And I didn't even see that until a month ago. So this stuff is not modeled on the objects API, it's all the other APIs. So every entity, data sources, pipelines, profiles, jobs, users, roles, they should all have their own directory. So we have a directory called Datasources, and then each specific data source is a JSON file that we pull down with REST and just put it as a JSON file. Collections, though, are a different thing. Each collection in Fusion, or the way it's represented, each collection is its own directory, and within that directory are where all the Solr files, the config files, are kept, and also the definition for the actual Fusion collection. It's called whatever the collection name is, .json. So when I saw the objects API, I thought that's pretty cool. I wish I had known about it sooner. But this is a sample call to the objects API for one of our deployments. You can see that the collections, I've collapsed them all because for this screenshot, I didn't want to make it too noisy. But we have a main collection called intranet here, is what I call, give me the objects associated with the collection called intranet. And you can see that it brings back the raw signals and the aggregation signals. It shows a couple of the pipelines. I've collapsed the query pipelines, but there's also features that go with the collection, and then all the index profiles. So you can see this looks a lot like a tree structure, and that's exactly how we model it in source control. So there's a query profiles. Parsers is new. Object groups, I guess that's new too. And so here's in our IDE, this is how the collection looks. I pulled down the stuff for intranet, but we have other collections as well. You can see even dashboards comes down. I forgot about that. Data sources, index pipelines, parsers, and all of that. Now inside the collections folder, we had a folder called collections, and then each collection has its own folder, like I talked about earlier. This is the definition for the folder. It has how many, I forgot what's in it, but there's like 2 or 3 items, and then it also holds all the features that go with the collection. And then the rest of these are all the files that get deployed to Solr. So one of the things we do after you make changes, we download it to your local machine, and then once you do that, typically we just cut and paste into the JSON file. So if I was pulling down the collection here, I would just replace that with the contents of the get that I used to get the definition for the collection. So once you have the changes, check it into source control. And then we have a command line script that will deploy it. You can run it from a terminal, on your own machine, or you can be more rigorous and use a CI tool like Jenkins or Bamboo to do the push. And then once you push the changes, that's when the rest of your QA team or other developers, they do smoke tests and regular tests, integration tests and all that, make sure it works. And then in our development cycle, once we use Jira, and so each QA and acceptance tester, they'll sign off on the feature, and once all that's done, we'll tag that release. So we'll push it out to a release candidate as a release candidate branch, and then tag it. That way, this is one of my favorite. I love this. You don't always have to test it. I don't always test it, but when you do it in production. Not really, don't do that. So the first thing, the easiest way to use REST from a command line, or the quickest way, is to just do a little bash script. It's quick to get up and running, and you use curl to push and get and post. But it's tedious to make changes. So when we started, we only had that one script, or we had a set of scripts, and somebody would type it in at the command line, and we'd wait, see if it came back okay. If it did, we would do the next one. What we did was we ended up consolidating into one script that has parameters. And that's where the tedious comes in. If anyone's done any Corn Shell or Bash programming, if you do parameters on the command line, parsing parameters is a pain. You have to do a lot. And then when 3 came out, Kyle, raise your hand, he's my coworker. He did a lot of the changes to this script as well. Actually, before he started, we had already done this. We added Bamboo into the process. Our company already has Bamboo, and other departments were using it. And it's a CI tool like Jenkins, but it's from Atlassian, the same people that do Jira and Confluence. And in a previous job, I had used Bamboo, so I knew how to do this. And this process was pretty easy to put in. Once you've tagged your source control and pushed it out to a good branch, the CI tool will check that out from source control, so only the stuff that you checked in gets deployed. And that's important too. That's the good thing about having a CI tool to do this for you. It starts with a blank slate. It knows where to find this in Git, pulls it down, and then the CI tool, after that, it will deploy it. So we pull down the source code, and we also pull down the code that we use to deploy it, the bash script. And we put all that together into one artifact. And so, and we do that with Bamboo. The paradigm of Bamboo, Jenkins is a little bit different, but Bamboo, the paradigm is you have a build step and you have a deploy step. And the build step is what makes your artifact that will be deployed. It can be a WAR file. In this case, for Fusion, it's just the directory of files. So the file structure I showed you earlier, that's all it is. It's not even a zip file. It just pulls down the whole directory. The Objects API, though, if you're in a hurry, the Objects API has an export option. And that will put everything that's related to what you asked for into one zip file. And then you can take that and use the Objects Import API on the server, and it'll bring it all in. I haven't tested that, and that's a little heavy for me. I like how we do things, because some of the parameters we take in our command line tool, if we're just doing it at our terminal to test, you can just say, push the data source called this, or push just the index pipelines. Don't push anything else. So with the command line tool, you have more control, more granular control over what gets deployed. And for Fusion, it's like I said before, we pull down the the actual Fusion configuration files. And then we also, from a different repo, we pull down the deployment script. And so when you're ready to deploy, Bamboo will take that command, and run the command on the source that you have. So I took a few screenshots of how we do this. Has anyone used Bamboo before? Okay. So Jenkins has a similar setup. Has anyone used Jenkins? Okay. So it's a similar process. I don't know if Jenkins has a separate deploy phase. To me, that was new with Bamboo. So the first thing we do, like I said, is we check out the source control. And then there's another step that pulls down that runs the script. Yeah, so we check out that. We put it in one directory. And then for the other script, we put it in a directory called util. So all of our code, there's the Fusion configuration tree that I showed you earlier. And then there's a little directory called util, which has the scripts that we use the one script, or the whole directory, but we only use one to deploy. And then the actual deployment, this is why it's good to be able to deploy with a command line. All we do for the deployment is just, we copy the scripts to the right target. That's the second step. And it'll package all this up into one artifact, which I mentioned earlier. Now this artifact is what, when it's ready, you give that a release, and then you can deploy that one thing to many different servers, one server, whatever you need. And a good CI tool will keep track of what's deployed where. And I'll show some screenshots of that. So when we're ready, we create a release. And the deployment plan is a separate step. It just executes the shell script that we talked about. And you can take that artifact and you can deploy it to your dev server. If you have a brand new server, a blank server, that's the other thing. If you start up a blank server somewhere, a blank Fusion server, you've got a brand new one, you can use this to push everything out there. So you can pretty much just instantly start up a new server, except for the collection. That was we'll get to that in a little while. We usually do our collections by hand at this point. And so here's, depending on the server, we just give it a different server name. Plasma is, I don't know which one it is. It's one of our non-production servers. And so for this particular push, we'll always push it to a test server. And the only thing that we change is the server name and any of the credentials needed to do the deployment. Because with the Fusion REST API, you still need to authenticate with the server before you can actually do anything. And that's good. So the deployment plan will download that whole package that we just made. And then once it downloads that package, it'll run that script. And so this is the actual command line that we do to make a deployment. If we're running it from our own terminal on our machine, instead of having the bamboo.fusion.server, we just say what the server is. And we also give it different credentials. I didn't put the password on the command line here because that wouldn't be right. And that's all it does. It's just a command line, and it'll call the script. The script is what does all the curl commands. And so you'll see a log happening, and I'll show that in a few minutes. So, yes. So this is where Bamboo really helps us. We have several environments. So you can see that the release that we just made is, we labeled it Intranet version 3.8. And some other servers, you can see we haven't deployed to this one in a while, but that's got 1.18. This is from a development branch on Dev 1, and then Dev 3 hasn't had anything pushed to it yet. So you can tell, you can look at your whole environment for dev, test, anything, any public servers that you're using in your development environment. You can see, with Bamboo, you can see exactly what's deployed where. Can you see that? Yeah, okay. So when you run this script, this is what our script does. We're concerned, all of our changes at SAS, what we're doing all the time is changing pipelines, index pipelines, especially query pipelines, always tweaking data sources. And so those are the main things that we push. And we always log what's being done. So you can see that it's loading the index pipelines. And it's we always have to refresh index pipelines. So in this script, you do all the stuff that the web application, the admin app does. And again, using the developer tools, you can see what it's doing. So that gives you hints. Yes?
For your rerunning the index by rerunning the data sources, refreshing it, do you have some decision making or a flag or something that you said if you have to clear and recrawl as opposed to just?
No, we don't do that. Though right now, that's something we need to work on. We'd probably make some kind of map somewhere that says if this data source is, or this pipeline is refreshed, we got to recrawl this. Because some of these we don't have to recrawl, right. And some of them we do. Right now we just remember, or Deepa, the other person on our team remembers. I don't ever remember. Do you?
Yeah.
Oh, he does. Okay.
And I assume if the change set that you're performing doesn't include changes to the index pipeline or to the data sources, then you don't bother with refresh them. You got a lot of places to do it.
Yes. So yeah, for what we're seeing here is a full deployment.
Right.
But the script it has options. You can say just do the data sources, or just do the pipelines. I don't remember if we don't do it by name, do we? We just do the whole set of data sources. Okay. So that's one thing. I like having the granularity because we don't always make changes to everything, and especially during the development cycle, if you're making changes on a dev instance of Fusion, you pull it down. You just want to push that one thing to test, or your QA server. And a lot of times what we'll do is we'll just take from Postman, just copy and paste that, and then put that back onto the QA server. So we don't necessarily go through source control between dev and test. But we do check it into source control and assume that it's going to work because we already tested it before we put it in for other people to look at. We try to be careful about that. It's embarrassing when someone finds a bug, in your code. So a little bit of pride makes us careful. So sometimes you actually do have a problem in production. So with if you have your stuff versioned and you have a script that can make the deployments, or a good CI tool, Jenkins has a rollback feature, which you can just click and it'll go back to it'll redeploy the previous version that was out there. I think we've had to do that one time, maybe. So in production, we've only had to do that. And I'll get to what we do with production in a minute. Typically, that's not a problem for our production servers. And at the end of this, I'll show you, or just list what we do to minimize that kind of problem. Oh, well, next slide. Here we go. We have 2 production servers, or 2 production clusters. Only one is active at a time. So we have a set of Fusion servers here and a set over here. When we do a production deployment, we only do it to the inactive one. So we'll push it there, and we will test that directly. If we have a proxy or a rewrite that everyone always goes to the same URL, but it'll route between the two. And so we do all of our smoke testing and a little bit of stress testing, and we have our users do a little reality check on their results, because if you mess up a data source and their results don't come back at the top like they used to, they get really mad. So we'll do that. Once everything's good, we will switch the active server, we'll switch them out, and so the new stuff is in production. And we always wait at least a day before we put the other production, or before we deploy what we just deployed to the active cluster to the other cluster. Because at least we did this one time. One time is all it took. As soon as we deployed changes, someone said, oh, we can just go ahead and deploy to the other one. It looks fine. And it wasn't fine. We were all in a meeting, and our CTO called and said, what's wrong with search? It stopped working. So we had both images were bad. Fortunately, Bamboo let us roll it back. So all we had to do was hit the rollback button, and it was fine. Yes?
So if you don't usually re-index, is there just one solar cluster so that both A and B fusion clusters point at the same solar, so you always have the same data?
Okay, so the question was, do we have a single solar cluster when we switch out? The answer is no. We have two separate everything. So yes, we do have to re-index twice sometimes. One of the techniques I use for because sometimes re-indexing, it used to take weeks for some data sources. Now it takes at the most maybe a day or two. How was our last full recrawl?
Probably about 2 days.
2 days.
That's what's
Right. So one of the things that we started doing that cuts a crawl from hours, or a recrawl, well, not a recrawl, but we do our crawl on one server, the inactive. We do all that. We get that ready. And then once that's in production, we waited our day. We'll do the inactive cluster. We have we use the solar copy. It's a data source that copies directly from a solar index or a solar cloud. And so we do all of our crawling to a staging server. And then our production, we have data sources that are in production that copy that data from stage to production. So we do a crawl one time and then we replicate it out twice. And when you're using that, the cloud, we use a zookeeper string to get all that. It works pretty well. It takes, instead of having to recrawl manually, it would take, if you start a recrawl, it may take hours. Now it takes minutes. So we can do that fairly quickly. And that was a big pain point. So yeah, I know exactly. The only caveat with that is it'll only work for stored fields. So if you have fields that are indexed and not stored, it won't work. We hit that problem once too. We had a very long field that we indexed, but we had a shortened version of it that we stored. And the first time we tried that with that collection, it's like, what happened? So we figured that out and fixed that. So yeah, you got to have stored fields. And also I found out recently, if you have nested documents, that doesn't work for that either. That's a different problem, but I got that. So you always wait a day before deploying. So I told you about the script. The bash script that we have is hard to use, hard to make changes. And using curl directly, some people like it. I think it's good for a test, but if you want to make changes, it's a pain in the butt. You got to remember all the little commands, all the little flags, switches. And I've been working on a Java-based tool that you can use using the Apache CLI utility, and it'll parse commands. It's very easy to use. Again, when we get that, we don't have it in production yet, but when we do, we'll just replace that bash command line that I showed you earlier with Java, blah, 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 whatever we want to change. It's not production yet, but we'll soon get to that. I put, if you want to look at it, I put it on my GitHub account. Again, my name is Todd Lack, so if you go to github.com/Todd Lack, you will see the Fusion Config Manager. So it's not ambiguous, it'll be obvious what it is. I haven't polished up the code, but I put it out here for this. Since I was doing this talk, I thought people might want to see what we're doing. Feel free to look at it, use it. I haven't done any static analysis on it, so I don't know, I may not have all the best practices in Java. I prefer public fields for constants and things like that. Your editor might scream at you if you look at the code. This could be more private. I don't really care at this point. One of the things about what we're doing, you can use a properties file to set things up. So if you have a little properties file, it'll read your server, your passwords, and all that. You can do your passwords encrypted or not, or however you want to get it. So this is like what we'll have is, well, if we want to go to stage, or this is, we would pull that directory tree that I was talking about, the files, we would pull it from here. That's where the configuration directory is. Where do we want this to go? What's the password? We have a clear password, and there's also an authentic encoded password. And so it's just the things that you would have you would just do in a script anyway. But with it's easier to use and debug Java to me. Also, the other thing, the CLI tool that we wrote, it'll handle collections. So you can take a full collection and copy it over. So it makes starting up a brand new server from an existing server very easy. It also takes wildcards. That's the other thing. Like here, this will get any collection that starts with intra. And it's just using the Java regular expression syntax for that. And here, I'm getting all the pipelines, all the query pipelines, and all the data sources that start with intra. And this is just a sample of the command line. Basically, it's Java. Here's the jar. And then this is the properties file parameter. You can spell it out, properties.file if you want. And this is the command file, so it'll take a list of commands as well. So if you want to, say, get this from this server, change the server, then put it to this server. And that's what I use it for, is to pull down from one server and directly push to another. And then, of course, I log everything so you know what happened. So you can see, this is the directory before I run that command, and when I get it down, this is what's left, or this is what's in there now. So it pulls all those things for you. It's really nice. Again, that's not in production, but we're going to get it there soon. And this is one thing I'm happy about is it pulls all of the collection files for you. And then after pushing it, you can see that the collection is not here, but now this one is. This is from a different run that I did. The things like I said at the beginning of the talk, we're all geared for Fusion 3 right now, and we're getting ready to upgrade to 4. So there's a couple of things that we don't do yet. And the tool that we're working on, it doesn't help you upgrade. So it's not that kind of migration. Every upgrade, the structures of like the data sources have changed, things like that. So Lucidworks, we just use the scripts that they give us to do that. And then it won't migrate content from Solr. So it won't re-index the data for you. It just does the configurations. You will still have to recrawl to get things going. One thing I would like to do with it is use the password file. I noticed that in 3, they start giving you how data sources have passwords. And they when you pull them down, they redact the password, so you can't see what it is. We manually go back in and type those. But the API also, the objects API, when you export, it gives you a file that has all the or a spot to put all the passwords. You give it a file, and it'll fill in the passwords for you. I haven't worked out how I would do that in an automated way yet, but I haven't had time. And then in version 4, there's the apps API. So they have, has anyone seen version 4 yet? So all of a sudden we got apps. I'll have to incorporate that too, but it's not too hard to add these types of entities. It's just JSON. And so you could write a tool that just pulls the JSON strings down and not even put it into a Java object. But I like having the metadata there in Java. So some final ideas to walk away from. Fusion configurations can be represented as a directory in a source control system. So it's very simple to have that in source control. Your deployments should check out a tagged version and have a deployment script that uses the REST API to push it up so your CI or CD tool can do this for you. It's all about not doing it yourself, just pushing a button and having it done. When we started, we had one person who was a Unix guru, type all this stuff, and we'd wait. Did it work? Did it not work? And now our least technical person on the team is the one that does the deployment. She just pushes a button, and there it goes. And thank you. Are there any questions? Yes?
How do you handle parameters that should be different between environments? Like our dev and QA,
yes.
They're all different things, and you talk about passwords, so there's
yes.
want it to be different.
Yes. So in the Bamboo script, we use environment variables. So if you're doing it from the command line, just set a different environment variable, like server equals this.
And it writes it into the JSON before it posts it?
Oh, no. If it's writing, we don't write into the, okay, yeah, that we have to do by hand. So like I said, passwords and data sources.
Right.
I would like to automate it because it's in here now. But right now we just do it by hand. Yes?
So I know in Fusion 4.0 that we can now export and import those collections and also the application itself though. So if you want to
Yes.
go from a different Fusion server to another, it's really...
Yes, if you're doing, the thing is, it's the whole thing. So if you're doing just a little bit, you don't have that flexibility at this point.
It doesn't be source control.
Yeah, and there's no source control. But yeah, I would like to, but you can unzip it into source control. It has the same, so yeah.
That's exactly what we're doing now. When you export the app from 4.0 or later, you're going to get a single object JSON.
Right.
Yeah.
You're going to get a single, you can add a single variables file. When you go to upload it back in, you can throw a variables file in there that has all your substitutions.
Yeah, that has the passwords in it, yeah.
Obfuscated. And then it's just system blobs and config sets are the other pieces you get out of there. So nice for you guys, you're going to get your Solr config files. They're going to come down inside that, which is very handy.
Yes, yeah. And again, the objects export does the same thing, except objects export, it will get all the related files. So if you just do it to a collection, it should get all the related data sources and anything that, that's associated with that collection. Anything else?
Is
Yeah.
this like open source? Are you taking pull requests? Or?
I put it out there if you want to look at it. If you want to give me a pull request, I'll look at it. I don't know if I'll have time. It's mainly for convenience. I didn't want to do screenshots of code, and it wasn't enough time. But don't critique anything. Yes?
How often do you actually deploy the servers that Fusion is running on? You got a lot of your showing where configuring Fusion that are running on one of those clusters.
How often do we change? I mean, make up?
Do you like tear down a cluster entirely?
Oh, not we. So the question is, how often do we switch out clusters? We've upgraded twice. We did well. We started with 2. We've upgraded to 3, and we have another. The external facing Fusion is at 4, but we don't really tear them down a whole lot. I mean, Kyle and I will play around with some OpenStack instances, and we'll do a lot of stuff with those. But in production, we try to stay really stable with that. Well, thank you all. I appreciate you showing up. Thanks.